we interrupt our regular programming to ask you, do you know that Ferdinand Marcos was awarded with the Medal of Honor for his valiant efforts in World War II? Or that the Vice President Leni Robredo received a COVID-19 vaccine while wearing a long sleeve blouse? Okay, we all know that both of these are some grade A, top shelf, premium fake news. But you knew that, right? You are way too smart and well informed to fall for that bullshit. But what if falling for fake news isn't about intelligence or how much information you have? What if we're hardwired to believe what we want to believe, regardless of the fact? The 2016 presidential election saw some fake news come out of nowhere. News website Rappler has found millions of false social media accounts spreading fake news linked originally to the 2016 campaign of President Rodrigo Duterte. They were shared millions of times, and it's not that we are just sharing fake news. We appear to be believing the stories too. In fact, 89% of internet users admit being duped by fake news. How can we be falling for fake news when we have instant access to more information than we've ever had before? Well, debunking misinformation should be a piece of cake, right? Decades of brain research says no. The truth is, there is a growing body of work coming out of psychology and cognitive science that says you have no clue why you act the way you do, choose the things you choose, or think the thoughts you think. Instead, you create narratives, little stories to explain away why you gave up that diet, or why you prefer Apple over Android, and why you fall prey to fake news. So I want you to take a moment to look around the room in which you are watching this. Just for a second, see the effort that went into not only what you see, but the centuries of progress leading to the inventions surrounding you. Start with the device you are using to watch this video. Then look to the machines and devices grinding and beeping in every corner of your life. The air conditioner, the light bulb, the ambulance wailing down a street far away. Contemplate before we get down on business. How amazing it is humans have solved so many problems, constructed so much in all the places where people linger. Buildings and cars, electricity and language. What a piece of work is human, right? Or is man, right? What triumphs of rationality, you know. And if you really take it in all this, you can become enamored with a smug belief about how smart you and the rest of the human race have become. Yet, you lock your keys in the car. You forget what it was you were about to say. You get fat, you go broke, you believe in fake news, and others do too. From the COVID 19 crisis to sexual escapades, we can really be stupid sometimes. It turns out that our brains have a mind of its own. Well, that's pun intended. From the greatest scientists to the most humble artisan, every brain within every body is infested with preconceived notions and patterns of thoughts that lead it astray without the brain knowing it. So you are in good company. No matter who your idols and mentors are, they too are prone to spurious speculations. And that is actually the topic of today's video. Cognitive biases are predictable patterns of thoughts and behaviors that lead you to draw incorrect conclusions. You and everyone else come into the world preloaded with these pesky and completely wrong ways of seeing things, and you rarely notice them. Many of them serve to keep you confident in your perceptions or to inhibit you from seeing yourself as a buffoon. The maintenance of a positive self-image seems to be an important, or rather so important to the human mind. You have evolved mental mechanisms designed to make you feel awesome about yourself. Cognitive biases lead to poor choices, bad judgments, and wacky insights that are often totally incorrect. They are like annoying brain glitches that can lead us to make faulty conclusions. Fake news often exploit this, and our brains love it, even if we're not conscious of its happening. Once we form conclusions, they're very difficult to change, even if we are presented with facts or evidences that directly contradict those conclusions. In this video, we are going to talk about 4 common cognitive biases, starting with confirmation bias, then availability heuristic. We are also going to talk about Barnum Effect, the Dunningkruger Effect, and how to reduce cognitive biases. Probably the most common form of cognitive bias is confirmation bias, a type of cognitive bias that involves favoring information that confirms your previously existing belief or biases. For example, imagine that a person holds a belief that bad things happen to people during Good Friday. Whenever this person encounters a bad news that happens during Good Friday, they place greater importance on this evidence that support what they already believe in. This individual might even seek proof that further backs up his belief while discounting examples that don't support the idea. Confirmation bias impact how we gather information, but they also influence how we interpret and recall information. For example, people who support or oppose a particular issue will not only seek information to support it, they will also interpret news stories in a way that upholds their existing ideas. They will also remember details in a way that reinforces these attitudes. Consider the debate over the safety of Chinese-made COVID-19 vaccines. Let's say Francisco is in support of Chinese-made COVID-19 vaccines. He seeks out news stories and opinions or opinion pieces that reaffirms the need for the mass administration of Chinese-made COVID-19 vaccines. When he hears stories about COVID-19, he interprets them in a way that supports his existing beliefs. Henry, on the other hand, is adamantly opposed to Chinese-made COVID-19 vaccines. He seeks out news sources that are aligned with his position. When he comes across news stories about side effects and people being diagnosed with COVID-19 despite being vaccinated, he interprets them in a way that supports his current point of view. These two people have very different opinions on the same subjects, and their interpretations are based on their beliefs. Even if they read the same story, their bias tends to shape the way they perceive the details, further confirming their beliefs. Half a century of research has placed confirmation bias among the most dependable of mental stumbling blocks. Journalists looking to tell a story must avoid the tendency to ignore evidence to the contrary. Scientists looking to prove a hypothesis must avoid designing experiments or researches with little wiggle room for alternative outcomes. Without confirmation bias, conspiracy theories would fall apart. Is the coronavirus a form of biowarfare developed by the United States against China, as claimed by Senate President Vicente Soto III last year? If you are looking for proof it is, you can actually find it. In a 1979 University of Minnesota study by Mark Snyder and Nancy Cantor, people read about a week in life of an imaginary woman named Jane. Throughout the week, Jane did things that showcases her she could be extroverted in some situations and extroverted in others. A few days passed, the subjects were asked to return. Researchers divided the people into groups and asked them to help decide if Jane would be suited for a particular job. One group was asked if she would be a good librarian. The other group was asked if she would be a good real estate agent. In the librarian group, people remembered Jane as an introvert. In the real estate group, they remembered her being an extrovert. After this, when each group was asked if she would be good at other professions, people stuck with their original assessment, saying she wasn't suited for the other job. The study suggests even in your memories, you fall prey to confirmation bias, recalling those things that support even recently arrived at beliefs and forgetting those things that contradict them. Over time, by never seeking antithetical through following specific Facebook pages, muting others, and hours of watching YouTube conspiracy theories, you can become so confident in your worldview that no one can dissuade you. Unfortunately, we all have confirmation bias. Even if you believe you are very open minded and only observe the facts before coming to conclusions, it's very likely that some bias will shape your opinion in the end. It's very difficult to combat this natural tendency. That said, if we know about confirmation bias and accept the fact that it does exist, we can make an effort to recognize it by working to be curious about opposing views and really listening to what others have to say and why. This can help us better see issues and beliefs from another perspective, though we still need to be very conscious of wading past our confirmation bias. In science, you move closer to the truth by seeking evidence to the contrary. Perhaps the same method should inform your opinions as well. Quick question. Do more words begin with R or have R as the third letter? Think about it for a second. Rip, rat, revolver, reality, relinquish. If you are like most people, you think there are more that begin with R, but you are actually wrong. More words in the English language have the letter in the third position than in the first. You have car, bar, farce, market, dart, and so on. If it's much easier to believe the first option, it's because it takes more concentration to think of words with R in the third position. Try it for yourself. So, if someone you know gets sick from taking a COVID 19 shot, you will be less likely to get one even if it's statistically safe. In fact, if you see a story on the news about someone dying after being vaccinated, that one isolated case could be enough to keep you away from the vaccine forever. On the other hand, if you hear a news story about how eating hot dogs lead to anal cancer, you will be skeptical because it has never happened to anyone you know. And hot dogs, after all, are delicious. The tendency to react more rapidly and to a greater degree when considering information you are familiar with is called the availability heuristic or availability bias. The human mind is generated by a brain that was formed under far different circumstances than the modern world we are in right now. Over the last few millions of years, much of our lives was spent with fewer than 150 people. And what we knew about the world was based on examples from our daily lives. Mass media, statistical data, scientific findings. These things are not digested as easily as something you've seen with your own two eyes. The old adage, I'll believe it when I see it, is the availability bias at work. Politicians use this all the time. Remember when DILG Undersecretary Densing said in a Facebook post that lugaw, referring to the vice president, is not essential? The politician hopes the anecdote will sway your opinion. He is betting that the availability heuristic will influence you to remember instances like when the VP was not involved in the government's plan or lack thereof in fighting the pandemic. It's simply easier to believe something if you are presented with examples than it is to accept something presented in numbers of or abstract facts, like the number of medical frontline workers who were provided transportation by the office of the vice president during the 2020 lockdown. Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman pinpointed the availability bias in their 1973 research. Their subjects had to listen to a tape recording of names being said aloud that included 19 famous men and 20 that the subjects had never heard before. They repeated the study with the names of women as well. After they heard the names, subjects had to either recall as many names as they could or identify them from a word bank. About 66% of the people recalled famous people more often than the unfamiliar names. And 80% of them said that the list contained more famous names than non-famous names. The word test about how often R is in the third position was Tversky and Kahneman's idea too. In both studies, they showed the more available a bit of information is, the faster you process it. The faster you process it, the more you believe in it, and the less likely you become to consider the other bits of information. When you when you buy a lottery ticket or bet on online sabong, you imagine yourself winning like those people on television or in the news who get suddenly famous when their numbers are chosen. Because people who don't win don't get interviewed, you are far more likely because people who don't win don't get interviewed, but actually you're far more likely to die in a car crash on the way to buy that ticket than you are to win, but this information is not available. Heuristics like this plays an important role in how we make decisions and act upon information in the world. The availability heuristic can be a helpful tool, but it is also important to remember that it can sometimes lead to incorrect assessments. Just because something looms large in your memory doesn't necessarily mean that it's more common. So it can be helpful to rely on numerous tools and decision-making strategies when you are trying to make a choice. You don't think in statistics, you think in examples, in stories. When it comes to buying lottery tickets, fearing the COVID-19 vaccines, looking for child molesters, and so on, you use the availability heuristics first and then facts second. You decide the likelihood of a future event on how easily you can imagine it. And if you've been bombarded by reports or have filled your head with fears, those images will overshadow new information that might contradict your belief. So based on the data I've collected from your comments, YouTube analytics, and your Facebook profiles, I have a pretty good idea of who you are. And here are my findings. Let me read it for you. You have a need for other people to like and admire you, and yet you tend to be critical of yourself. While you have some personality weaknesses, you're generally able to compensate for them. You have considerable unused capacity that you have not turned to your advantage. Disciplined and self-controlled on the outside, you tend to be worried and insecure on the inside. At times, you have serious doubts as to whether you have made the right decisions or done the right things. You prefer a certain amount of change and variety and become dissatisfied when hemmed in by restrictions and limitations. You also pride yourself on being an independent thinker and do not accept others' statements without satisfactory proof. But you have found it unwise to be too frank in revealing yourself to others. At times, you are extroverted, affable, sociable, while at other times, you are introverted, wary, and reserved. And some of your aspirations tend to be rather realistic. Does this sound accurate? Does it describe you? Well, it should. It describes everyone. All of the statements I actually said came from a 1948 experiment by Bertram R. Forer. He gave his students a personality test and told them each one had been personally assessed. But then he gave everyone the same analysis. He asked his students to look over the statements and rate them for accuracy. On average, they rated the bogus analysis as 85% correct, as if it had been personally prepared to describe each one of them. The block of text I have said earlier was actually a mishmash of lines from horoscope collected by Forer for his experiment. So the tendency to believe vague statements designed to appeal to just about anyone is called the Barnum effect. It can also be called as the Forer effect. Now, psychologists point to this phenomenon to explain why people fall for pseudoscience like biorhythms, iridology, phrenology, mysticism like astrology or numerology, and even tarot cards or the law of attraction. So the Barnum effect is part of a larger phenomenon psychologists refer to as subjective validation, which is a fancy way of saying you are far more vulnerable to suggestions when the subject of the conversation is you. Since you are always in your head, thoughts about what it means to be you take up a lot of your mental space. With some cultural variation, most people are keen on being individuals, unique and special persons whose hopes and dreams and fears and doubts are all their own. If you have the means, you personalize everything: your license plates, your ringtone, your computer's desktops, your wallpaper, your bedroom's walls. Everything around you says something about your personality. Cultivating an incomparable self, either through consumption or creation, is not something you take lightly. Yet, somewhere between nature and nurture, we are all far more similar than we think. Genetically, you and I, or rather, you and your friends are almost identical. Those genes create the brain that generates the mind from which your thoughts spring. Thus, genetically, your mental life is as similar to everyone else as the feet on in your shoes. Culturally, we differ. Yes, our varying experiences in our varying environment shape us. Still, deep below, we are at the same, or rather, we are the same, and the failure to notice this can be exploited. If a statement is ambiguous and you think it addresses you directly, you will boil away the ambiguity by finding ways to match the information up with your own traits. You think back to all the time spent figuring out who you are, dividing your qualities from the qualities of others, and applying the same logic. Here's an excerpt from a real horoscope at horoscope.com. At some point during the day, you might have the feeling that you aren't working hard enough to keep the forward motion going, and you might feel panic rise. This could prove a good motivating factor, but you don't need to push yourself harder than you're going now. You're on a roll, and it's likely to continue. Just pace yourself. Now, here's another one from the same source on the same day, but for a different sign. Don't be too hard on yourself if you're dragging a little towards the end of the day. You'll be able to recharge your batteries before tomorrow, and in the evening relax at home with a good book. Seen straight on, horoscopes describe the sort of things we all experience, but pluck one from the bunch, turn it ever so slightly, and you will see it matching all the details in your life. If you believe you live under a sign and the movement of the planets can divide your can divine your future, rather, a general statement becomes specific. It is this hope that gives subjective validation its power. If you want the psychic to be real or the sacred stones to forecast the unknown, you will find a way to believe them even when they falter. When you need something to be true, you will look for patterns. You connect the dots like the stars of a constellation. Your brain abhors disorder. You see faces in clouds and demons in bonfires. Those who claim the power of divination hijack these natural human tendencies. They know they can depend on you to use subjective validation in the moment and confirmation bias afterwards. The psychologist Ray Hyman has spent most of his life studying the art of deception. Before he entered the halls of science, he worked as a magician and then moved on to mentalism after discovering he could make more money reading palms than performing card tricks. Now, the crazy thing about Hyman's career as a palm reader is, like many psychics, over time he began to believe he actually did have psychic powers. The people who came to him were so satisfied, so bowled over, he thought he must have real gifts. Subjective validation cuts both ways. Hyman was using a technique called cold reading, where you start with the wide angle lens of generalities and watch the other persons for cues so you can constrict the focus down to what seems like a powerful insight into the other person's soul. It works because people tend to ignore the little misses and focus on the hits. As he worked his way through college, another mentalist by the name of Stanley Jacks took Hyman aside and saved him from the delusion by asking him to try something new. tell people the opposite of what he believed their palms revealed. The results, they were just as flabbergasted by his abilities, if not more so. Cold reading was actually powerful, but tossing it aside, he was still able to amaze. Hyman realized what he said didn't matter as long as as his presentation was good. The other person was doing all the work, tricking him or herself, seeing the general as the specific, just like in the Barnum Effect. Now, mediums and palm readers, those who speak for the dead or see into the beyond for cash, depend on subjective validation. Remember, your capacity to fool yourself is greater than the abilities of any conjurer, and conjurers come in many guises. You are a creature impelled to hope. As you attempt to make sense of the world, you focus on what falls into place and neglect that which doesn't fit, and there is so much in life that does not fit. When you see a set of horoscope, read all of them. When someone claims he or she can see into your heart, realize that all of your, or rather all of our hearts are much the same. Imagine you are very good at a particular game. Pick anything, Mobile Legends, Valorant, poker, doesn't matter. You play this game with friends all the time and you always win. You get so good at it, you start to think you could win a tournament. So you get online, you pay the joining fee, and get your ass handed to you in the first round. As it turns out, you are not so smart. All this time, you thought you were among the best of the best, but you were really just an amateur. This is the Dunning-Kruger Effect. And it's a basic element of human nature. Think of all the YouTube stars over the last few years, the people poorly twirling weapons and singing off key. These performances are terrible, and not in a self-aware ironic way. No, they are genuinely awful, and you would wonder why someone put themselves on a worldwide stage in such an embarrassing way. The thing is, they don't imagine the worldwide audience as being more sophisticated than the small audience of friends, family, and peers they usually stand before. As the philosopher Bertrand Russell once said, in the modern world, the stupid are cocksure while the intelligent are full of doubt. Now, the Dunning-Kruger effect is what makes Pilipinas Got Talent and Pinoy Idol possible. At the local video, okay, you might be the best singer in the room. Up against, let's say, the entire country, not so much so. Well, have you ever wondered why people with advanced degrees in, say, climate science or biology don't go online and debate about global warming or evolution? Now, the less you know about the subject, the less you believe there is to know in total. Only once you have some experience do you start to recognize the breadth and depth you have yet to plunder. Of course, these are generalities. The economist Robin Hanson noted in 2008 that the Dunning-Kruger Kruger effect becomes a popular catchphrase near election time because it helps to paint opponents as being morons. The actual research that coined the term was performed by Justin Kruger and David Dunning in experiments at Cornell around 1999. They had students take humor and logic tests and then report how well they thought they had scored. Some people accurately predicted their own skill level. Some knew they sucked at humor and they were right. Others had a hunch they were better at telling jokes than most, and had this belief confirmed. So sometimes people who are really good at something are well aware and can accurately predict their scores, but not always. Overall, the study showed you are not very good at estimating your own competence. More recent studies have attempted to refute the absolute black and white predictions of Dunning-Kruger, that the unskilled are the least aware of it. A study by Burson, Larrick, and Clayman in 2006 showed that on easy tasks where there is a positive bias, the best performers are also the most accurate in estimating their standing. But on difficult tasks where there is a negative bias, the worst performers are the most accurate. So, the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't always influencing you to think that you are, say, awesome when you are actually mediocre. It breaks down like this: the more skilled you are, the more practice you put in, the more experience you have, the better you can compare yourself to others. As you strive to improve, you begin to better understand where you need to work on. You start to see the complexities and nuances. You discover masters of your crafts and compare yourself to them and see where you are lacking. On the other hand, the less skilled you are, the less practice you've put in. And the fewer experiences you have, the worse you are at comparing yourself to others on certain tasks. Your peer don't call you out because they know as little as you do, or they don't want to hurt your feelings. Your narrow advantage over novices leads you to think that you are the best. So Charles Darwin said it best: ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. Whether it's playing guitar or writing short stories or telling jokes or taking photos, whatever, amateurs are far more likely to think they are experts than actual experts themselves. Education is much about learning what you don't know as it is about adding to what you do. The recent explosion of reality programming is a great example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. A whole industry of a-holes is making a living off of making attractive yet untalented people believe they're actually a genius at certain things. The bubble around reality stars is so thick, they may never escape it. At some point, the audience is on the joke too, yet the people in the center of the tragedy are often completely unaware. As someone moves from novice to amateur to expert to master, the lines between each stage are difficult to recognize. The farther ahead you get, the longer it takes to progress. Yet, the time it takes to go from novice to amateur feels rapid. And that's where the Dunning-Kruger effect strikes. You think the same amount of practice will move you from amateur to expert, but it won't. Everyone experienced the Dunning-Kruger effect from time to time. Being honest with yourself and recognizing all your faults and weaknesses is not a pleasant way to live. Feeling inadequate or incompetent is paralyzing. You have to plow through those emotions to get out of bed. Seen along a spectrum, the Dunning-Kruger is on the opposite end of the from depression with its crippling insecurity. Don't let the Dunning-Kruger cast its shadows over you. If you want to be great at something, you have to practice. And then you have to sample the work of other people who have been doing it for their whole lives. Compare and contrast, and it actually would help if you eat some humble pie too. Lastly, even though cognitive biases are pervasive throughout every system, there are ways to address your bias blind spots. Number one, be aware. That is the best way to prevent cognitive bias from influencing the way you think or make decisions is by being aware that they exist in the first place. Critical thinking is the enemy of bias. By knowing there are factors that can alter the way we see, experience, or recall things, we know that there are additional steps we must take when forming a judgment or opinion about something. Number two is to challenge your own beliefs. Once you are aware that your own thinking is heavily biased, continuously challenging the things you believe in is a good way to begin the debiasing process, especially when receiving new information. This can help you expand your pool of knowledge, giving you a greater understanding of the subject matter. Lastly, you may want to try a blind approach, especially in the case of observer bias. Researcher conduct blind studies to reduce the amount of bias in scientific studies or focus groups. By limiting the amount of influential information a person or a group of people receive, they can make less affected decisions. So once again, my name is Dex Kamitan and thank you for watching.